The wind came down from the north, sharp enough to bite through wool. Dust carried across the street in thin spirals, brushing against her torn hem. The woman moved like someone used to being watched. Every step measured, every glance quick. The town of Hollow Creek wasn't big, just a crooked street lined with a few stores, a saloon, a livery, and a church with one bell that hadn't rung in years. Still, it had more eyes than she could stand. She paused near the well, lowering her bundle. Her boots were worn down to leather flaps, and one sole hung loose. Her face, young, maybe late 20s, was drawn and pale beneath the trail's grime. A few men leaned against the post office rail, studying her in silence. One spat, the sound cutting through the dry air. "New face," said another, narrowing his eyes. "Looks like trouble." She ignored them and walked to the saloon. The sign read Eagle's Rest, though the paint had long since peeled. The door creaked as she pushed through, and the stale smell of whiskey and smoke hit her hard. Conversations quieted. The barkeep looked up from polishing a glass, his eyes flicking over her travel-stained dress, then down to her bare hand. No ring. "I'm looking for work," she said, voice hoarse. "Don't care what kind." The barkeep set the glass down slow. "Ain't looking for help. Not your kind, anyway." Her jaw tightened. "And what kind is that?" He gave a lazy shrug. "The kind that brings trouble walking behind her." She turned, shoulders stiff, but man blocked her way. Young, mean grin, the sort who thought he was owed something by every woman who crossed his path. "Ain't polite to leave without a drink, miss," he said, stepping closer. "I said I'm not staying." Her hand clenched around her bundle. He reached out, catching her wrist. "Now, don't be—" The sound came fast, a chair scraping, boots crossing wood. The next thing she knew, the man's hand was wrenched away, and he stumbled backward. The stranger who'd moved stood tall and quiet, gray dust on his hat brim. A rancher. By the look, broad shoulders, rough hands, sun-cut lines of the eyes. He didn't say a word, just looked at the man until the air seemed to thin around them. "Let her be," the rancher said finally, low and even. The saloon man sneered. "Ain't your concern, Cade." "Then I reckon you won't mind me making mine." Something in his voice shut the others down. Cade turned back to her. "You best go," he said. She didn't thank him, didn't nod, just walked out into the daylight again, heart hammering. The street was empty now, shadows long from the sinking sun. She didn't know where she was headed, only that she couldn't stop moving. By the time the last light faded, she was miles from town, walking barefoot. The wind carried the faint roll of thunder. Her body shook with exhaustion, but she kept on until her knees buckled in the mud. She fell forward, catching herself on her hands. The bundle rolled from her grip, a faded shawl, a small keepsake wrapped in cloth, and nothing else. She pressed her face to the earth and whispered, "Keep moving," but her voice broke. Then, somewhere behind her, a horse snorted. The sound came closer, hooves steady, not hurried. She lifted her head, hair plastered with rain. A figure rode into view, the same rancher from town. His hat brim dripped with water, his coat dark with mud. He dismounted, eyes scanning her face in the dim light. "Thought I'd find you this way," he said. She tried to stand. "Go back," she rasped. "You don't know me." He didn't argue, just held out a hand. When she didn't take it, he crouched down instead. "You'll freeze if you stay here. I've had worse." "I believe it," he said softly. Then he reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a blanket. "Still don't mean you should die for it." The rain thickened, pattering against his hat. For a long moment, she stared at him, this quiet man who didn't demand or pry. Finally, she let him lift her onto his horse. The ride back was a blur of cold and exhaustion. She leaned forward, trying not to let her head fall against his shoulder. He smelled of leather and smoke. When the ranch lights came into view, she almost cried from the sight. He led the horse into the barn and carried her inside, past the smell of hay and damp wood. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "House is warmer, but I figured you'd trust a roof with distance." She gave a faint laugh. "You read people, do you?" He smiled barely. just the broken ones. When he left, she wrapped herself in the blanket and sat near the lantern. The barn creaked under the storm's weight. In the flicker of light, she traced the scars on her knuckles, then reached into her bundle, pulling out a small locket. Its hinge cracked, inside a faded sketch of a man she once called husband. Her throat tightened. "You'll regret this," she whispered toward the door where the rancher had gone. "You'll regret choosing me." Outside, thunder rolled low across the plains. By dawn, the storm had passed. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. She woke to the sound of boots on the barn floor. He was there again, carrying coffee and a folded coat. "You eat yet?" he asked. She shook her head. Didn't figure on staying, then figure on breakfast first. He handed her a tin plate with biscuits and dried meat. She ate slowly, eyes darting toward the open door. "You got a name?" she asked finally. "Elias Cade," he said. "And you?" She hesitated. "Nora." He nodded once, as if that were enough. "Well, Nora, I've got fences to mend and a sick horse in the pen. You're welcome to ride out after you finish. Or stay and work a spell if you need coin. I don't take charity." "Then don't. Take pay." Something in his plain way of saying it settled her nerves. She followed him out after breakfast, helping drive the chickens from the porch. Her hands remembered the motions. She'd worked land before, long ago, for the first time in months. Her body moved without fear, guiding it. That night, she sat by the fire inside the small ranch house. The walls were lined with tools. The floor swept clean. Cade moved with quiet purpose. No wasted motion. No questions he didn't need answers to. She could have hated that calm, but instead it felt like breathing air that didn't scrape her lungs. When he handed her another blanket, she caught his gaze. "You sure you want me under your roof? Folks will talk." He poured himself coffee. "They already do. Never stopped me before. Maybe they'll stop buying from you. Maybe they'll bring trouble. Trouble comes whether we invite it or not." He met her eyes again. "Steady? You hungry still?" She smiled faintly. "You don't scare easy, do you?" "Not of you," he said. And for the first time since she crossed into Wyoming, Nora felt the edges of her armor crack. It was near midnight when she woke. The fire had burned low, and the house was still. Then came the sound, distant hooves, soft but certain. She slipped from the bedroll and crossed to the window. 3 riders, silhouettes against the moonlight, stopped on the ridge above the ranch. Her breath caught. She knew that stance, that waiting stillness. Men who hunted for coin or revenge. The door creaked, and Cade appeared, already buttoning his coat. "You saw him too?" She nodded. "There for me?" "Who?" She swallowed hard. "A man I was married to. He's alive, or someone's working for him." He looked out toward the ridge, then back at her. "Go to the barn. Stay low." "Don't," she said. "If they ask, tell 'em I came through and left. Don't risk." "I'm not telling men like that anything." He stepped outside before she could stop him. She pressed against the wall, heart pounding as voices carried through the cold air. "Evening," Cade called. "You boys lost." A man laughed, a rough sound. "Heard there's a woman came through here. Dark hair, scar on her cheek. Plenty of women pass through," Cade said calmly. "None here now." "You sure?" Another voice pressed. "She's worth a bounty." "Then you'd best keep looking," Cade replied. There was a pause, long enough for Nora to imagine the rifle lifting, the trigger half drawn. Then, one by one, the riders turned their horses and rode off into the dark. When Cade came back inside, his jaw was tight. She was waiting, her hands clenched. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "Maybe not," he replied, closing the door. "But I did. You don't even know what I've done." He looked at her for a long time. "Don't need to. You're here. That's enough." She stared at him, the weight of his words heavier than any chain she'd worn. Something broke inside her chest, fear or gratitude, or both. "I'll leave in the morning," she said softly. He didn't argue. "If you can walk," he said. "You've got fever. Then you'll be rid of me soon enough." He smiled faintly, half weary, half kind. "Don't be so sure." When he left, She sat by the dying fire, staring at the flames. She thought of the way his hand had steadied her, the way his voice had cut through her panic. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure she wanted to keep running. Outside, wind swept across the open fields. The moonlight caught the distant trail, and she knew the men would be back. But for night, there was warmth, shelter, and a man who'd lied for her without asking why. She touched the locket in her pocket, the image of her past life fading to dust, and whispered to the dark, "You'll regret this, Elias Cade." From the next room, his voice came quiet through the wall. "Maybe," he said, "but not tonight." The morning came sharp and cold, with frost silvering the corral fence. Elias was already outside, his breath turning to mist as he checked the horses. Nora watched from the porch, a blanket around her shoulders. He'd given her another day to rest, though both knew rest wasn't what she needed. It was distance. She could still see the ridge in her mind, those 3 riders watching from the dark. Her sleep had been thin, broken by dreams of her husband's hand closing around her wrist. She'd woken with a start, fingers wrapped around a knife she didn't remember grabbing. Elias noticed her staring out toward the hills. "They won't come again today," he said. "You sound sure," she murmured. "I'm not, but man's got to act like he is." She almost smiled at that. Almost. The ranch was quiet except for the animals stirring, the squeak of a gate, the low murmur of Elias talking to his mare. He moved like he'd been born to this land, measured, unhurried, confident even in silence. It unnerved her, how steady he seemed, as though nothing could shake him. By mid-morning, she joined him by the pen. "You still want help?" she asked. He nodded toward the hay cart. "You can start with that. But don't push your leg. Fever took strength from you." "I ain't breaking. I can see that." They worked side by side, the rhythm quiet but sure. Her hands remembered the way to work, the pull of rope, the ache of muscle. It steadied her mind, gave her something to fight other than ghosts. As the sun climbed, Elias rode out to check the north fence. She stayed behind. Sweeping the porch, a hawk circled overhead. Then, faint but clear, came the sound. Hoofbeats again from the east this time. Her breath caught. She ducked behind a wagon, watching the dust trail rise. 2 riders this time, not 3. She ran inside, grabbed Elias's rifle from beside the door, and stepped out again. When they reached the gate, one called, "We're looking for Elias Cade." Nora didn't answer. Elias appeared moments later, calm as ever, wiping his hands on a rag. "You found him," he said. The men exchanged a glance. "Sheriff sent us. There's a feller in town of skin questions. Says he's the husband of a woman came through here." Elias's jaw tightened. "That's so." "Said she's wanted. Claimed she killed a man back in Kansas. Offered coin for her return." He didn't blink. "Sounds like he's got a story worth hearing. I'll ride in later." The men nodded uncertainly, tipped their hats, and rode off. Only when the dust settled did Nora step out, rifle still in hand. "You shouldn't lie for me again," she said. Elias turned to her. "And let them take you back to that life? You don't even know what I did." "Then tell me." She looked away. "No, you'll look at me different." "I doubt it." Her voice shook. "You will. Everyone does." The silence between them was heavy as the sky. Then he spoke, quiet and steady. "You're safe here, Nora. Whatever comes, we face it as it comes." She stared at him for a long moment, then lowered the rifle. For the first time since she'd arrived, her hands trembled, not from fear, but something close to trust. That night the wind rose again. It came from the west, carrying the dry crackle of heat. Elias stepped outside and stopped dead, an orange glow bleeding over the horizon. "Fire," he muttered. Within moments, the smell reached them, smoke and burning sage. He ran for the barn while Nora fetched buckets. Together they worked fast, weighing down the fences, the roof, the haystack. The fire hadn't reached the ranch yet, but it was coming hard through the brush. Elias saddled the horses. "We'll need to cut a brake line, or we'll lose it all." "I'll help," Nora said. "You'll stay with the stock." "I'm coming, Elias." Her tone left no room for argument. He handed her a shovel, and they rode out toward the north field. The wind whipped their coats as sparks blew through the night like angry stars. They worked in silence, digging, sweating, coughing against the smoke. The fire hissed and snapped close enough to burn their eyes. A horse screamed in the distance. Nora stumbled once, catching herself on her hands. "You should have left me where I fell," she said hoarsely. "Would have been easier." Elias kept digging. "Maybe, but I don't take easy roads." She looked at him through the smoke, his face streaked with ash, his eyes steady even as embers swirled around them. "Why?" "Because some things are worth the trouble." She swallowed hard, throat burning. "You don't know what I've done." "Then tell me," he said again, voice sharp against the wind. She dropped the shovel. "My husband, Aaron Holt, was a gambler, a drunk. We moved from town to town, always running from debt. One night, he killed a man over cards. Sheriff came knocking. He told them it was me. Said I lost temper, took the blade. Elias didn't move. They locked me up 2 days before I escaped. Been running ever since." She wiped her face with her sleeve. "You see now why they'll never stop coming." He looked past her to the fire line, where the flames finally began to die under the break they carved. "I see a woman who survived what most wouldn't," he said simply. Her chest tightened. "You should hate me." "I don't." "Then you're a fool." "Probably." They stood in the fading glow of the fire, the smoke curling around them like ghosts. And for the first time since that night in Kansas, she let herself cry. By dawn, the fire had burned itself out. They sat side by side on the blackened earth, exhausted. Elias handed her his canteen. She drank slow, then met his gaze. "You could turn me in, you know. Take the bounty." He looked toward the pale horizon. "Money's never worth that kind of loss." She frowned. "Loss?" He nodded. "You think I saved you for coin? You're wrong." Her breath caught at the way he said it. Quiet, sure, as if he'd already decided something she hadn't yet dared to hope. 3 days later, the riders came back. This time, not bounty men or curious drifters, but Aaron Holt himself. Elias saw them first in the field. 3 figures again, same ridge, same dust. He went for his rifle. Nora was by the barn, cleaning the tack. She froze at the sight. "It's him," she whispered. Elias's voice was calm, but his jaw was set. "Then we end it." The riders reached the yard. Aaron dismounted slow, every movement oiled with arrogance. His hair was slicked back, his coat too fine for the trail. The other 2 men flanked him, hands near their guns. "Well," Aaron said, smiling cold, "ain't this cozy? Thought I might find you here. Nora, you always did have a taste for soft hearts." "Leave, Aaron," she said, voice steady though her hand shook. He laughed. "Not till I get what's mine." "You lost that right a long time ago." He turned his gaze to Elias. "You the new fool playing hero? She's a liar. She'll ruin you same as she ruined me." Elias didn't rise to it. "You're on my land," he said. "Turn your horses and go." Aaron sneered. "Or what? You'll shoot me down like she did that man back in Kansas." "She didn't kill him," Elias said. Aaron's grin faltered, but he recovered quick. "You think you know her?" He spat. "She's a thief, a runaway, and she's mine by law." "She ain't yours," Elias said evenly. "Not anymore." The silence before the draw was long and terrible. Then everything happened at once. Aaron's hand twitched for his pistol. Elias moved faster, but one of Aaron's men fired first. The shot grazed Elias's arm. Nora screamed, diving for the fallen rifle by the fence. Another shot cracked the air. Splintering was beside her. She rolled behind the wagon, heart pounding. Elias fired once, hitting the second man clean through the shoulder. Aaron ducked behind his horse, firing wildly. Nora saw Elias stumble, blood darkening his sleeve. Without thinking, she aimed. The world narrowed to the pull of the trigger, the sound of her own breath. Aaron rose, pistol leveled at Elias. She fired. The echo tore across the plains. Aaron dropped, dust billowing around him. Silence followed, heavy, unreal. The other man fled, his horse vanishing into the hills. Elias lowered his rifle, breathing hard. Nora stood over her husband's body. His eyes were still open, shock frozen on his face. Her hands shook as she let the rifle fall. Elias walked to her side, pressing a rag to his bleeding arm. "It's done," he said quietly. She stared down, voice breaking. "I didn't want." "I know." She sank to her knees. "He said I'd destroy everything I touched." Elias crouched beside her. Maybe he was wrong. They buried Aaron at the far edge of the field. No words, no prayers, just the wind whispering through the grass. By evening, the sheriff rode up, having heard the gunfire. He listened to Elias's account, looked at Nora, then at the grave. "Guess the frontier settled its own law today," he said. "Ain't gonna write this one up." When he rode off, Elias turned to Nora. "You're free now." She stared out toward the horizon. "Free," she whispered, as if testing the word. "Don't feel like it yet." "It will," he said. "Give it time." The sun was setting, painting the plains in pale orange light. She turned to him, eyes red but clear. "You should have let me go that first night." "I tried," he said. "Didn't take." She almost laughed. "You'll regret choosing me." He looked at her then, steady and sure. "Maybe, but I already regret waiting so long." The wind picked up, rustling the grass around the fresh grave. Behind them, the ranch stood quiet but unbroken, the smoke of the fire long gone, replaced by the faint smell of rain. And for the first time in her life, Nora didn't run. The first lightning strike cracked open the horizon, a white gash that split the dark plain in half. The wind howled to the broken barn door, like a wounded animal, snapping the lantern flame until it died. For a long second, everything was shadows, shifting, uneasy, alive. Callum shoved the door closed, his broad frame catching the gust. "They're closer than I thought," he muttered, checking the rifle in his hands. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the stretch of land outside, where distant hooves beat against the earth like thunder. 5 riders, maybe 6. They're spreading wide. Emmeline's pulse hammered. The sound of it filled her ears more than the rain. "You said they'd come for you," she said, her voice shaking despite herself. "But it's me they want, isn't it?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and she could see the truth in the way his eyes softened. "Doesn't matter who they came for," he said. "They won't take either of us." She felt the chill of the floor through her bare feet. The barn smelled of hay, gun oil, and fear. Outside, the land had gone black, rain turning the ground to slick mud. The horses in their stalls shifted nervously, their bodies pressing against the wood. Callum handed her the revolver he'd cleaned earlier. "If they breach the door, you shoot. Don't wait." "I've never." "You will if you have to." The thunder rolled again. Then gunfire. A flash through the slats, a bullet tearing into the post behind her head. Splintering would into her hair. Callum ducked low, returning fire through a gap in the boards. One man's shout carried through the rain. Pain and surprise tangled together. Emmeline pressed her hand to her ear, the sound of the shot ringing through her skull. "They'll flank the side," she called. He nodded once. "Already moving. Stay behind the trough. Don't let them draw your fire." Lightning illuminated the yard, and for a single breath, she saw them clearly. 6 riders, coats dark with rain, faces wrapped in cloth. One dismounted, dragging something heavy from his saddle. A torch. The sight froze her blood. "Callum," she shouted. "They're going to burn us out." He turned in time to see the man strike the torch against the saddle horn. In the storm, fire roared to life like it had been waiting. Callum raised his rifle. But before he could shoot, another figure rode into view behind the raiders, shouting orders. A familiar voice. "Hold the fire. She's worth more alive." Emmeline's breath caught in her throat. She knew that voice, knew the rasp, the smug tone. She'd heard it when her father's body had been left on the steps of their burn home. Silas Creed, the man who had betrayed her father, stolen his ranch, and hunted her across 3 territories. Her stomach turned cold as the rain. She whispered his name under her breath, and Callum's gaze flicked to her, sharp and knowing. "That's him." She nodded. "He doesn't let anyone live twice." Then it ends here. The barn shook with another blast of gunfire. The men outside fanned out, calling to each other through the storm. Emmeline crawled behind a water trough as Callum fired again, fast and precise. A rider went down. Another cursed and fired back. The storm's fury became their cover, the rain so heavy that visibility dropped to mere yards. Callum ducked low, sliding toward the sidewall. "They'll come in through the back," he said. "I'll meet them there." Emmeline grabbed his wrist. "You can't, there's 6 of them." He leaned close, his face lit by a streak of lightning. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said, almost smiling despite the chaos. "I've been waiting for this." And before she could stop him, he was gone, slipping out into the night, rifle in hand. Emmeline's hands shook. She pressed her back to the trough, revolver ready, heart drumming like war. She tried not to breathe too loud. The rain came harder, washing dirt into rivulets across the floor. Then, a shadow at the door. She fired. The recoil tore through her arm, the sound deafening. A man fell forward, dead before he hit the ground. Another silhouette moved behind him, crouching, then retreating. She fired again, the muzzle flash lighting her face. Her breath came in gasps. Her arms burned. The revolver was nearly empty. But she didn't stop. Outside, a shout rang out, a cry she knew was Callum's. "Callum!" she screamed, stumbling to her feet. She ran to the door, pushing it open. The storm hit her full force, rain slashing her face. She saw figures grappling in the mud. Callum against 2 men, one already down. The other swung a rifle like a club, knocking Callum to his knees. "Stop!" she shouted, raising the revolver, but another hand seized her from behind. A voice at her ear, low and cruel. "I told you I'd find you, sweetheart." Silas Creed. He reeked of whiskey and smoke. His grip was iron around her arm. "You should have stayed hidden," he said, twisting her wrist until the revolver fell. "Now I've got you and the land deed both." Before she could fight, he yanked her toward the barn, his other hand dragging a pistol from his belt. But lightning flared again, revealing Callum rising behind him, blood running down his temple. His rifle was gone, but his eyes burned steady. "Let her go," Callum said. Creed turned, sneering. "This your new man? He looks half dead." Callum didn't answer. He lunged. The 2 men crashed into the mud, fists in fury. Creed's gun went off. Once, twice, one bullet catching Callum in the shoulder. Emmeline screamed, grabbed the fallen revolver, and fired until she heard the click of an empty chamber. Creed staggered back, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. He stared at her like she betrayed some cosmic order, like he couldn't believe a woman had beaten him. Then he fell. The rain washed the blood into the earth. Callum slumped beside her, clutching his shoulder. She dropped to her knees, pressing her hands over his wound. "Don't talk," she whispered. "Don't you dare." He laughed softly, rain dripping from his hair. "Guess I regret not wearing my Sunday coat." "Callum." He caught her hand, squeezing. "You did it." "You stop running." She realized then that he wasn't just talking about Creed. He meant all of it. The fear, the loss, the years she'd spent hiding from what she'd survived. She pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "We both did." The thunder faded into a distant roll. The rain softened. Around them, the plains breathed again. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the plain silver and still. The sky stretched wide and pale, as if it too had survived something terrible. Smoke curled from what remained of Creed's camp. A single wagon burned to the axles, the smell of gunpowder still sharp in the air. Callum sat against the fence post, shirt torn and bloodstained, his arm bandaged with Emmeline's scarf. The firelight from their small camp crackled low. She poured water from the kettle, hands still trembling. "You should have let me ride for help," she said. "That wound needs stitching." He gave a faint smile. "You'd never have come back." She hesitated, then sat beside him. Maybe not. The silence between them was different now. Not empty, but full of things they'd said without words. She watched the horizon, where the first light crept over the distant ridge. The world felt reborn. Quiet, Unsure, he looked at her from the corner of his eye. What happens now? She drew her knees close, thinking of her father's ranch, of the ruin she left behind. Creed's gone. The deed's still valid. I could go back, rebuild what's left. You could, he said softly, but you don't have to do it alone. She looked at him, caught off guard by the gentleness in his tone. You barely know me, Callum. He chuckled, wincing at the movement. I've known your fear, your fight, your temper. That's more than most men know about their wives after a lifetime. Her breath caught. Wives! He shrugged. Just a thought. For a long moment, she said nothing. The fire popped. The wind stirred the grass. She turned the tin cup in her hands, her reflection trembling in the water. When I first met you, she said quietly, I told you you'd regret choosing me. He looked at her then, eyes steady, voice low. I regret waiting so long. She blinked hard, a tear slipping before she could stop it. He reached up, brushing away with his thumb, rough and gentle all at once. They stayed like that until the sun broke free from the clouds, painting the world gold, but not the romantic kind of gold, the real kind, the light that comes after you've survived something that should have killed you. Callum shifted, wincing but smiling. You ever think maybe the frontier isn't about land or cattle? Maybe it's about finding something worth fighting for. She nodded slowly, and keeping it. Behind them, the land stretched empty and wide again. The scars would fade, the grass would grow, and somewhere in the sound of the wind, there was peace, not the quiet kind, but the earned kind. Callum stood with her help, his arm over her shoulder. Together they walked toward the ruins of the house, smoke rising in thin curls. The air smelled clean. The rain had washed everything else away. At the doorless threshold, she paused. What if we fail? He looked at her, then at the wide land ahead. Then we start over, like the land does. She smiled, tired, hopeful, the kind of smile that means something's truly ended and something else has begun. The camera of the mind would linger there, two figures against a pale sky, the house behind them broken but standing. And for once, neither of them was running. And somewhere deep in that silence, a single truth echoed like an old prayer through the plains. You can't outrun the past, but you can ride beside someone who helps you face it.